He always showed up at our houses and was like, babe, what can I do for you? And she said he was like a disciple of Jesus. Like just the way that he was so selfless and so giving and just so, I think that that's one of the most amazing qualities. Hello and welcome back to the Living Fully podcast. I'm so excited today to have another conversation with my dad, Gary. He is one of everybody's favorite guests that comes on the podcast, and we like to talk about a bunch of fun things like mountain climbing and life, and we would be amiss if we didn't talk about a major life shift for us and someone who was truly like the ultimate definition of living fully on the Living Fully podcast. And that was my grandpa, PaPa Bud, who was my dad's dad, who passed away in December. And he was truly the most dynamic person that I've ever met in my life. And he was just so full of wisdom and life, the way that he experienced adversity and just lived life with pure joy, the way he told stories, the way that he was like the ultimate entrepreneur. There are just so many things that I feel like you could pull from his life that are lessons in what it means to live a full life. So my dad and I wanted to reflect on that today and just kind of talk a little bit about my grandpa, about losing him, but also about this commitment that we have as the oldest. I'm the oldest of all my siblings. He's the oldest of all his siblings. My grandpa was the oldest. This commitment to sharing our family's legacy, which is my grandpa's legacy, with anybody that we can. So we're really excited to do this podcast for you guys today. We hope we can get through it, but like we keep saying, we really want to show the joy on the other side of losing him, because that's what he always showed in his life, was just joy on the other side of adversity. So here we go. My dad and I are here on the podcast again to have another conversation about something that may not be as easy to talk about as the mountains were. And it's still, something that's very fresh on our minds because it's just happened. But it's the loss of my grandpa, Bud, and his dad. And why we want to do a podcast on this is there's a lot of reasons, but we're big about sharing our family legacy, and we think that sharing stories are so powerful, and especially when you have a family member who was so otherworldly and made such an incredible impact on so many people's lives. Just taking this opportunity to share like some of those things that he taught us and reflections on just this incredible way to live that we feel like he passed on to us. We'll talk about this in the podcast, but my grandpa was the oldest child. My dad's the oldest child. I'm the oldest child. And sometimes we talk about this like it's a great thing being the oldest child, but you do feel a lot of responsibility to make sure that like your family stories get told and your legacy gets passed on. So, my dad was like, I don't know, I'm nervous to talk about this, but it's time. And I was like, I know, like it's never easy talking about it, but like every time I talk about him, like it brings me so much joy at the same time, because he was just the best person I ever knew in my life.
And the conversation that you had on the presentation, and it was funny. I missed it. I was in Africa when you talked on the
keynote,
the keynote talk, and it was about Grandpa, which was kind of a surprise. We didn't know that was what it was going to be about until after you did it, and I was on my way back, and it was the first time I got to New York and was able to get to a internet Wi-Fi, and I listened to it, and I said, if we're going to talk about Dad, we've got to do him justice. We got to talk about the good and the bad, and kind of the way you did in the message you delivered on that podcast, and so that puts a lot of pressure on us to step up and tell a story.
Yeah, but I know he'll I was going to say he'll be with us while we're telling this story about him, but he wouldn't have wanted us to talk about him. So maybe he won't be with us.
Yeah. Well, it's
He's
just like,
such a humble, awesome guy.
it's like somebody posted the other day, it was Blaze's birthday, and they said, and Dad and Blaze and Uncle Dick are the only three in the graveyard right now. So
Oh, Lord.
so Blaze and Grandpa are sitting there together, and Uncle Dick's probably got a Bloody Mary and having a heck of a time.
That was my grandma's brother. He was the first person in our family graveyard because my dad and Papa had this idea to do a family graveyard, so you don't really get a choice of where you're buried. Kyle was like, well, what happens if something happens to us? And I was like, well, you'd be buried on my one side with all our children, and then my other husband would be buried. Oh, just kidding. But that's it's funny to think about.
But that's a project that Dad, he loved projects like that, and that family graveyard was so important to him. And family, it was important to him. He wanted the family to be together in life and in death, and that graveyard kind of was part of that. And he, even from like the quarry that we got the marble out was Michelangelo's quarry, and the Carrera quarry, and every aspect of that graveyard was designed 15, 20 years ago, and it's laid there empty until just here recently, but that was one of his projects, one of his many projects that he drugged me into.
Many projects, yep. And I like what you just said. Family was just the thing that was the most important to him, and he wanted us to live well together, and then he wanted us to be buried next to each other. He just wanted us together, in life and in death. And it's like, gosh, we talk a lot about living fully and living on this podcast. We don't talk about the other side of things, which is, when you lose someone that was such a, huge part of your life. But this is part of life, and it's part of living a beautiful life. And the way that he lived was pretty incredible, but also the way that he went out was pretty incredible too. So if you guys I'll just give you a little bit of a background on how we kind of grew up. From my point of view, so we grew up on this farm with all of our cousins. So there's 23 first cousins kind of all spread around this farm. My grandparents are in the center. My aunts and uncles are kind of dispersed around this farm. And, we grew up in this really amazing way, just being these country kids. And, my grandpa was just this incredible figure and person that was kind of right in the middle of this setting. And he was just the best grandpa ever. So, my dad is also a really great grandpa. And if you guys listen to the podcast that we did on the mountains, he talks a lot about his lessons to his grandkids. My dad was really intentional and being I'm going to climb these mountains and I'm going to write these lessons to our grandkids. How our grandpa passed on lessons to us was a little bit different. I feel like he told us a lot of stories. I feel like he drug us alongside of him to do the most crazy, random, amazing, cool things.
And he was a storyteller, and that's I wanted to write down messages. He did it by telling stories, and sometimes the stories change quite a bit. So I don't know if he just remembered different parts of them, or if he just needed to twist it in a different direction to leave us a message in there. But that's and we can all remember these stories, and I know you'll get into the project, but those stories are so valuable, and they're in our memories, and it's stuff that we need to talk about. And that's how we keep him in our conversations, and how we keep him present. By telling and retelling his stories.
Yeah, for sure. And, these are some stories that I wasn't as privy to. I heard the kind of second version of these stories, but it was later in life that I learned about how he grew up. I always knew that he was just this incredible person that lived life so richly. But, there's always a story underneath that for anybody that lives like that. And I mean, his story was just so wild. And so, like, the way that he grew up, and I'll let you tell a little bit of that story. What's so inspirational to me, and I say it all the time, and I wrote it in my book, and I think it's really important to think about this generation because they're almost gone. In my book, I wrote a chapter called Endangered Species because I feel like they're like that. It's like this generation that lived through the Great Depression and like the world wars, and they're not going to be here for much longer. So like at the end of this podcast, as we talk about our the legend on earth that was my grandpa, I want to encourage you guys to do these little projects with the people that you love, like we did with my grandpa, to kind of capture your family legacy, because once they're gone, like you don't want it to go with them. Like you want to be able to capture that. That was such a gift that we were able to capture that. But describe a little bit about how Papa grew up. Like,
it sounds crazy, but Dad was, we say he's the oldest. He was the second oldest. His sister was 11 months older. He was the second oldest when his mom had him. She was 15. She was married at the age of 13. Which he said he can't believe that back then that's the way it was.
Yeah,
pre-depression. Sister died when she was 11. Dad was 10, riding a bicycle to school with him on the back of it. They got hit by a car, and she died from the accident. Dad, out of the 5 of them, I think 3 of them died of diseases or accidents at a very young age. He when he was 13, he had smallpox or chicken pox, and he lost his right eye, and he was blind from 13 years old on.
In that eye, yeah.
And he became a boxer, and it's a funny story. He was an undefeated Golden Gloves boxer, and he decided he was going to make a living as a professional boxer, and his mom wrote a letter to the boxing commission because you couldn't tell he was blind in his right eye, and he ended up getting drafted and going to the military with one eye, and his mom wrote a letter to the boxing commission saying he was blind in one eye.
Because she didn't want him to box.
He never got his professional boxing license. So that was one of the stories he told. He said I was mad at my mom at the time for doing that, but boxers back in these days would end up with there was no rules around it, and they would fight.
Could have ended up all the way blind
until they were crippled. But that's just one of many stories. But that was his childhood. His dad died when he was 16. He raised his siblings from the age of 16 on. He was the oldest male in the house. My grandmother, his mom, worked at hauling hay. So she had a hay crew that she used to drive a truck, and they would haul hay. Dad delivered coal, and he drove a coal truck since he was 13 years old with one eye and a load of coal that he would deliver to houses. That's what they heated with. So he had kind of a rough childhood, a lot of tragedy, but that's kind of maybe what made him so strong on raising a family and having us together in life and in death. So, because he saw both sides of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the strength of our family kind of was passed down from his lessons.
Yeah. And what a juxtaposition to the way that so many people feel around, instead of saying, well, woe is me and I lost all my family, like, I'm definitely not putting all my eggs in this basket again. He did the total opposite of that. And he became obsessed with family and keeping our families together. When my dad and I were talking about this episode, I was like, did he ever get mad? And my dad said, only when we would like go against our siblings. That's like the angriest that he got. Like, because he was just, I can just remember it even as kids, like us cousins, like they liked it when the cousins hung out together. They didn't always like it when like an outlier friend would come along. They like wouldn't even say their first name. They'd be like, well, you got that Thomas girl like coming around, where's Max? It's just, they of course supported us like having other people in the community, but it was definitely second to our family. And I think that that's kind of why our family is just like so tight knit and so close. But like you talking about this and all that he went through, it's the thing that I admire most about him is his pure joy. Like the way that he lived, he was so joyful. He was always smiling and always laughing. You guys have seen this clip. I'm going to pull this clip. You can watch some special clips of my grandpa in the YouTube video if you're listening to this on audio. But we did this family project where we asked my grandparents all these questions. And one random question that we asked him was, what makes you smile? And he just said, well, it don't take a lot to make me smile, like a big fish or a big deal or it don't take a lot to make me smile. And that was just so true.
My name is H.E. Bud Ervin.
And what does H.E. stand for?
Bad name. Harbert, H-A-R-B-E-R-T, Eugene. See, that's almost as funny as that label, isn't it?
What makes you smile, Papa?
Everything makes me smile.
Catching a big fish.
Can be a big fish or a big deal or anything can make me smile. Doesn't take much to make me smile.
What, in your opinion, is the secret of life?
Well, I always told them, and I still, that's my main thing, as long as they all stick together, I'm talking about each family, it's kind of hard to beat you.
He was so full of joy and full of life, and yet he had the hardest life that he could have just been so crass and closed off to life, and he was just the opposite. Like, he experienced so much adversity, but it made him who he was. And it's just such an incredible example. Anytime I'm going through adversity, I always think of him. And I always think about, I just love him so much, and especially at the end of his life, and you just hear more and more about what he went through. And I used to be like, gosh, I wish I could go back and just erase it for him, because you just hate for somebody you love that much to experience like anything hard. But it was what made him who he was.
That's where he got his joy from. He's been through painful things, but little things made him happy. It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. And the porters in Africa, they didn't make a lot of money. They worked hard, but they had joy. And Dad was kind of that way.
Yeah, for sure. So there's 6 kids in my dad's family, and he's the oldest. They lived in Louisiana when my dad was younger, and my grandpa was kind of a jack of all trades, and he was such a worker. So back then in Louisiana, you guys growing up, tell me a little bit about like what he did back then. So that's when that was his first like soiree into the grocery store business,
yeah,
right?
And even before that, it was a funny story how he and Mom met. And he was 21. The story about him getting drafted is just bizarre. He said he showed up, it was a warm day in December, in a T-shirt to the draft board. And he said he figured it'd be 5 minutes, and they gave him the eye test, and he says, I'm blind in my right eye, and they'll send me home. And he said they went through the eye test, and he said, I'm blind in my right eye. And they said, get on the bus. And he said, what do you mean? He said, well, tell that one-armed guy we put on the bus earlier that you're blind in one eye and you can't go to the Army. And so he said that night he got off the bus in Detroit, and he said it was in a snowstorm. And he said all I had was a T-shirt.
Oh my God!
And he said it was 3 days before they let me call home to tell my mom that I got drafted. And first thing she said, well, you've only got one eye. And he said, yeah, that's what I told him. And he ended up going to the military. And him and my mom were dating at the time. She was a switchboard operator, and he tells funny stories about he couldn't call his other girlfriends because she knew when he was calling them from the switchboard. But she made her mom promise that she would go to school after high school, and she wouldn't get married until she turned 20. So 1 month after she turned 20, Dad was stationed in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. She flew to Germany, and they got married. a year later, I came along in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. So that's where I was born, but that's what started his family and their life together. Is a commitment that they made when they were young, that they followed through with when he started his career in the Army. He served his years, and we moved to Louisiana. And in Louisiana, it was just a hodgepodge. He started out working in the oil fields, and he said, he wasn't cut out for, standing in these ditches and with snakes and everything else that crawled in and out of these ditches with him. So he started out as a grocery rep, and then ended up buying a bunch of little community grocery stores, and worked hard. He learned a lot of skills. He was a butcher when we lived in Lafayette, Louisiana. He was Franklin, Louisiana is when he bought his first grocery store, and I remember that. It's probably one of my first memories of him working. And this grocery store was right down the road from a trailer that we lived in. So I just remember that. I remember as a kid bagging onions and watching him work in the butcher shop in this little grocery store. So that was kind of the first part of that. And we moved back to Kentucky when I was in the third grade. And it was just every year there'd be a different direction. So he was always flexible. He was always a hustler.
Yeah, he was.
So that's kind of what brought us to Louisiana, and then eventually back to Kentucky.
Yeah. And he was so like one thing to the next. Like, and I think that we'll talk about your similarities and differences in a second, but like he was very entrepreneurial and very like all in, all the chips on the table. We're going to go all in on farming or mobile home selling or like buying this land and like, clearing it out and putting houses on it. Like there were just all of these things that he did. And you said that, I said, what's one thing that you learned back then? Like when you were working alongside of him kind of, and you were like, I learned that I could never be a farmer because there were so many things out of his control that like ruined your family over and over kind of financially, like as the hog farms would fail or whatever, and he would kind of pick himself up and he always found a way. But,
yeah, he wasn't. He always said I've been broke 3 times, and all 3 times were while I was a farmer.
Yeah,
and it was, and I kind of lived the last time was in '74. I was a junior in high school, and I kind of lived that. 74 was a terrible time financially, and grain prices were terrible. There were diseases with our hog floors. We were leveraged. Interest rates were crazy. So but like anything else, he kind of laughed about it. And those are lessons that I learned through watching him, and I was probably old enough and yet young enough to take on that. But like everything else, he would always find the next thing to move to. He always found a way to support his family.
Yeah, he did.
To change the narrative.
Yeah. So how do you feel like there's probably more similarities than differences, but how do you feel like in your life being his oldest son, like how do you feel like you're similar to him?
He was a risk taker. And he would take risk on a gut feel on like when we moved, he bought the Army base that we moved to, and then the farm we bought was a bomb range that had to be cleared, and he cleared it with his kids and himself.
Which is so wild back in the day that like everybody's so careful with kids nowadays, and like he was letting y'all pick up bombs that could have probably gone off at any time if one of them had not been detonated.
Yeah, they were live rounds, many live rounds.
That's crazy.
But he took risk. I took risk. I guess I've had the benefit of some of the mistakes that he made. He made it usually at a family table. We said, well, I probably messed up here, and I learned from those mistakes. And like I said, farming. Things you can't control. In 1980, when we started the communication business, interest rates went up to 16%, and that was just, we were caught in the fate of the economy. Luckily, we were in the right place, in the right industry, but things you can't control, like farming, you couldn't control the disease. You couldn't control
Commodity prices.
the price of corn. You couldn't control
the weather.
Yeah, there were so many things, and that's he grew up farming. He loved farming. The day he died, the September, when they picked the corn crops, he got on the bush hog and he cleared 600 acres of field edges with a bush hog. So he loved being on a farm, and and I love saying I'm a farmer, but there's way too much risk in that. So
but he also too, like, as you guys were trying to figure out what your career path would be, he loved what you guys were into. Like, he kind of helped you guys. Tell us about, like, how, so we have a family business, or my dad has a family business that all my brothers and a lot of the boy cousins work in, all my uncles, that is like, it's in the tech world. So it's like cable TV and then construction, cable TV construction, and then fiber optics and building out all these networks and stuff like that. It's broader than that, but he wasn't he reading it he was reading the newspaper and he saw something about like a cable system that needed to be built or something.
Yeah, the franchise that for the cable TV system in our hometown, and it's just he bought this Army base. He had an officers club, and officers club, when he was 12 or 13 years old, he made money by shining officers' shoes at the officers club. So he remembered this building, and when he bought the Army base, that officers club came along with it. And with that officers club had a great big tower. And he says, we got a tower, and what else do we need to be a cable TV operator? And little did we know there was a lot more to it. But that was kind of an instinctive thing he had that kind of launched us into the cable TV business and into multiple careers in owning and operating cable systems and fiber optic networks, and then being one of the biggest telecommunication companies in the country right now, developed from that one tower in the back of the officers club.
Yeah, and because you couldn't get a job in the coal mines that summer,
and
right?
They paneled. I shot dynamite in the coal mines underground, and I couldn't get my job back when I got out of college, and cable TV lineman work was the only thing I could get. So it was.
What a bet, though.
It was more luck than skill.
Yeah. That's just so amazing, though. And it's so cool that, like, he began that with you guys. But he was the ultimate risk taker. And he seems like he was always all in, which meant he failed a lot. But he just always, like, through every failure, he just picked himself back up and he would just keep going and keep going and keep going. And I love hearing all these stories about him and, like, sharing these stories, because it's just like he just lived such a rich life. But I think it's because of that. It's because of his hard times and his failures and, all of these things that we're talking about. Okay, so here is my reflection on my grandpa. As he's the best person that I've ever met in my entire life. He is a person that every single one of the grandkids of us 23 would say the same thing. Whenever we'd come home from, like, college or, like, bring a friend home, you couldn't wait to bring them to, like, PaPa's house, because you knew he was going to make them eat something or drink something or, like, go on some ride on something, or, he just, like, as soon as someone would walk into the door, he'd welcome them, and you were just, like, so proud that he was your grandpa, because he made whoever you brought through that door feel just like he'd made all us feel, like, super special. And, like, he was just, amazing the way that he was, like, when you'd walk into his home. And I feel like, this was during his funeral when he passed away in December, and we were all, like, talking about him. And I was talking to my Aunt Laura about him, and she said, something that I always remember about him is when, my dad and our uncles, they were gone during the week building their cable business, and they would be working out of town, then they come home on the weekends. And my grandpa, you just heard all the businesses he was running, and then he had Bud's Country Corner, this grocery store, liquor store, pawn shop, motel, and he was busy all the time. But I can still remember every single day, like, of my life growing up, he would come to our house and check on us and check on our moms. and just show up like every day while y'all were gone. And my Aunt Laura was like, and he was so busy and he had so much going on, but he always showed up at our houses and was like, babe, what can I do for you? And she said he was like a disciple of Jesus, like just the way that he was so selfless and so giving and just so, I think that that's one of the most amazing qualities about him is it didn't matter how busy he was or how much he had going on. He served his family every single day of his life.
And that wasn't a burden to him. He even the last year, I'd call to check in. If I was gone out of the country or somewhere, I'd call to check in. And the first thing he'd ask was, "You need me to do anything for you? Would you need anything at the house?" And even at the end, he'd make sure somebody would go take care of that. But he got so much joy for doing things for other people, and that's maybe one of the biggest lessons that I got from him is and I'm not sure if it was his upbringing that made him want to serve it, or if he thought that he owed that to his family. But he, like Laura said, he checked in. He checked in. He never checked out because he did that until last year. If I had something, and a lot of times I would just say, go just make sure my pool cover is undone or something like that. He would hop on that Ranger and drive across the field, and he'd go check on it. Or he raised this garden from hell, this 5-acre garden. He put up whiskey, and he had all of these projects. We had COVID, and he decided he had to feed everybody. So he would catch a 5-gallon bucket of crappie every day, and he'd bring them to my brother Tim, that was a master fish skinner, at the end of the day. And there was no crappie too small that wouldn't go into that bucket. And he would clean the crappie, and he'd bring crappie fillets to everybody. So it was those things he did it with joy. He did it not because it was a responsibility. He did it because he actually got joy out of doing it.
Yeah. I like what you just said. He checked in. He didn't check out. I think that there's a major narrative, which, I get it. Everybody's family's not like this. I always say, like, you can be the first generation of your family tree, like creating a family like this if you didn't have a family like this. But I feel that so many people, they want to create distance from their families. They want to create independence from their families. They don't, and so many people, grandparents are like, I don't want to bother them. They've got their own life. Like, I'll show up to the ball games or whatever, but I don't want to intrude or interfere. And I love that aspect of thinking about him like that. And I like it. You and Mom are really like that too. Like, you're just a part of our lives. You're always just showing up, and you just walk in the house, and it's just amazing. And I like remembering, like, check in, don't check out. Because, like, family is everything, and families have issues. Like, our families had issues, but we always came back to family. We always came back to family. And, like, we'd rather be right with our family than, like, right about the thing. You just kept choosing your people over and over. But I love what you just said, like how he just checked in all the time, instead of checking out.
And it's a tricky line to draw, is how much is too much. Can we be overbearing parents? Can we be overbearing grandparents? Yeah. And that's your job to say you need to give us a little bit of space. And that's the last thing we want to do. We love our grandkids, and we want to be around them as much as we can. But at night when it's time for y'all's routine, we need to get out of the way too. So
I'd rather you stay and give them a bath.
Yeah,
I know. My mom's like, "Gosh, Kyle's gonna get tired of us coming over there." I'm like, he's the one that asks every time you're in town, "Are your parents coming over tonight?" Like, because he wants you to. Like, it's
well, and then I so appreciate being around them, because they know who we are. They're truly my grandkids are truly excited when they see us.
Oh my gosh!
Sunday's starting
kidding?
to get that way.
Excited
with me.
is not the word.
She's she was a little holdoffish
Yeah.
because she's usually in her mom's arms and she don't want anybody else when she's there. But you know, it's I get the daughter-in-laws, the son-in-laws. You know, he's accepted those as family. Immediately, and that's part of. I don't think he ever thought he was better than another person. No matter how broke you are, he was broker. No matter how bad things have been for you, he's had worse things happen to him. So, you know, it was something that you couldn't one-up him on those type of things, and to see how he persevered through those situations was actually pretty remarkable. And it's kind of where I try to model myself and what I do after kind of what I saw him do in life.
I remember he used to always tell us, like, be careful who you step on, or don't step on anybody going up the ladder, because you're going to have to pass them again on your way back down. You know, he was just so, and he was so like revered and admired in our community. You know, he'd know the governor and he'd know the senators, you know, but he'd also, like, you know, the guy that just got out of prison, he'd be shaking his hand and talking to him at the table at Bud's Country Corner, eating a ham biscuit with them. Like, and that's how we were as kids. Like, we all worked at this little country store, and like, I mean, we were around the ex-felons and we were around the, you know, fancy people growing up. And he truly did. He was the exact same person also around all those people. He was just like who he was, and everybody loved him equally.
When you look at kind of when he finally passed away, we were talking about his best friends, and it was most eclectic group of guys. It was guys, most of them were in their 30s that were drawn to him, that were a neighbor of ours, and that always, you know, would help Dad, and he'd be the first one over there with a tractor to fix or something like that. And then when he was in his last days, the people that came to the house to visit him, you can tell, you know, that the friendships he had, it didn't matter age, or maybe he was older than most, and most of the guys that his age were gone already, but his friends and his relationships and the people that he impacted were a bunch of young people that really got
so
something
true.
out of that.
Yeah, the last day that like Jade and I were around him, and I told this story in my keynote about how he was just like the ultimate entrepreneur to young people, you know, giving all this advice and telling them. He kept telling me all these ideas. He'd be like, Mal, I got another idea. And he'd tell me these ideas, and he kept being like telling me all these ideas. And he said, that's when he said to me, he's like, I got so many ideas, but I just don't have any more time. And I was like, gosh, to, you know, just be that alive until the very end. And a lot of his ideas and his advice were really good ideas too. Like, but we were there, and like Jim and Linda Baird, they have a big, you know, meat business in our hometown that's garnered a lot of success, and they're just really good people. And we were all there together at the same time, and Jimbo like pulled me aside, and he's like, man, you don't know what this man means to me. And like everybody said that about him, you know, he took such joy in helping other people in their business, and he didn't ask for anything in return, you know, just like helping, serving people all his life. That was just so powerful.
Well, same thing with his daughter-in-laws. He did it to every, you know, he was such a great retailer when he worked at the grocery store. And people didn't come to the grocery store to buy the sandwiches that Mom made. They came to the grocery store to talk to him and Mom. Mom would make sure they paid their bills on the way out the door. But that's what drew it. He always had a story. He always had a conversation. He always had advice for somebody. And, you know, he was almost like a counselor, too. People, when they had trouble, would come to him. What should I do about this, Bud? And he'd always have an opinion on things. So that's helpful when people reach out to you thinking that, what can you do to help me?
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of like, what can you do for me? He always thought like, what can I do for you? You know? Okay. How do you feel he was different as a parent than he is as a grandparent? Because obviously I didn't see him as a parent to you guys growing up. But I certainly saw him as a grandparent, and that he was second to none. He was the best on earth. and just so present and there and joy filled for us every day. And, he'd have projects for us too. Like Max and I, we were the oldest two. I was the oldest girl. Max was the oldest boy. He had us plant a 2-acre pumpkin patch. And then not only did he plant it with us, but then he'd harvest it with us. And then we'd take it on a trailer and sell it in the parking lot of Walmart. And then we get kicked out of Walmart because we didn't have a permit to sell our pumpkins. Then he'd bribe the sheriff with something he'd made in his back barn. He just he was such an intentional grandparent. And, we were all in those gardens together and all it's just, the list goes on and on of the things that we just did alongside him. But how do you feel do you feel like it's different being a parent and a grandparent?
So, the kind of what you described was a grandparent, and kind of similar, but kind of like with me and your relationship, it was education, discipline, we had to give love, we had to care about you and your well-being. But as a grandparent, all we got to do is love our grandkids. And, there is educational parts of that, but it's more lessons learned. Not you got to go up there, take a shower right now, and you got to eat your green beans and stuff like a parent has to do. Yeah. And that's kind of sometimes a tough part. And the funny part about it is that was kind of my mom's job was the disciplinarian.
Yeah.
And Dad's job was let's go shoot some rabbits and cook them for dinner. It was something that we would do to be fun. And mom's job was we got to be dressed up for church on time. We got to be at school.
Yep.
We got one car, and that drives us to school in the morning and picks us up in the evening. And that was the schedule. And the difference between a parent and a grandparent, when he was a grandparent, he was more let's experience how it is to raise pumpkins. And so he taught you about farming. Let's teach you how to hustle, and let's take these pumpkins and show them how to turn them into money. And and then let's see how we deal with adversity when you had a trailer load of pumpkins and Walmart.
The sheriff comes along.
Called the sheriff, and they said, you can't sell pumpkins in the Walmart parking lot. They're selling them in the store. And he said, go tell them that. So I think y'all ended up getting to sell the rest of your pumpkins. But that's kind of an example of how the lessons and kind of how they're just different from a grandparent. My grandkids, when they come home, we're going to cut wood. We're going to build a bonfire. We're going to do dangerous things. We're going to ride 4-wheelers 100 miles an hour, and we're things like that, instead of you got to do your homework, you got to do this, and that's kind of the difference. And everybody says being a grandparent's way more fun than being a parent, and doing the hard things as a parent are necessary, but you don't have to do those as a grandparent, and it's so much more fun doing the fun things with them, and teaching them things by doing the fun things like the pumpkin patch.
Yeah, it's less pressure because you're hopefully you've raised your kids well, and they're instilling the things they need to, so it's the pressure's off, so you get to enjoy them. I think that's awesome. Okay, so we've talked about this already, but how home base was always family for him. So even he lived in Louisiana, he was doing well at the grocery store, but they always wanted to get back to family, just always family. Family was home base. And I think that, that's obviously lived for generations, because I even practiced that in my own life. But, no matter what happened, no matter what business failed, he just always came back to the family and made it work for the family. Wait, what was this? Okay. And something I think about, and when I start worrying about something that I'm doing in my own life, I try to check myself with the reality of things. And I always am worried that I'm working too much, away from my kids, even though essentially I'm around my kids 10 times more than the majority of a working parent, because they're around a lot of times. And when I think of like Papa, who worked all the time, constantly, and like how amazing and dynamic he still was, it makes me breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief that like your kids don't, they don't remember you being gone all the time or working. Like they remember that time with you and the way that you made them feel and the attention. Like that's the same with Papa. I mean, there were so many people that showed up at the end of his life that knew him like barely at all, but they were like, he's the most influential person in my life. It's like a quality over quantity thing, I guess.
And the amazing things about working and having your kids involved while you work is they do pick up stuff like that. They do understand that that's part of life, earning a living and work and having a job. That's part of adult life, and that's how you can. But the children or the kids, I know that I picked up a lot on Dad's businesses, even from Louisiana. I remember he was 27, so I was probably 6 or so, and I remember kind of working in that grocery store. And so I remember farming when we moved back, driving a tractor. And, and then I remember when we sold the crops and we sold the livestock that we didn't make money off of it. And what did we do wrong? So those are lessons kind of, and with your business and having kids around your business, it's kind of lessons that they pick up on too. So so you got to kind of be intentional about how that works also.
Yeah. I know. I need to think about like the good in that versus the bad. I think that's just like, especially moms, I feel like innately, like you just feel that like it's never enough or it's never enough time, or you should sacrifice everything that every single bit of time that you have. But there's so much richness that comes from your kids seeing you also like hustling and earning a living and working. I mean, I remember that about Papa growing up.
And just like Lisa, I was gone Monday through Friday, and she had 4 kids at home on a farm. And other than Dad coming by in the morning and checking, do you need anything? She had 4 kids in one vehicle, and part of the time she would drive, load up all 4 kids, take you to school, and then you and Jade to school, and then bring them back home. And when we moved to the farm, she had no babysitter. It was either Dad would come by for an hour while she would run somebody to town, or he would say, well, let me just run them, drop them off for you. So that's kind of the mom when Dad was out working, and it seems like it takes 2 to raise a family like that.
He also, obviously his life had a lot of good and bad in it. But what I love about him too is he wasn't just a grandparent that was there during all the good times. And you said this when we were talking about this. You said he was there at Miss America when you competed, but he was also there at your family day at the treatment center, that you had to go to. So like he really did. He showed up for you, like no matter the case, no matter the state that you were in. And he was just as proud of us when the boys were winning wrestling matches or when I was doing Miss America as he was anything, even just like the regular things in life, or when we made a mistake and we picked ourselves back up. And that's something too that I've learned from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we he was, we never hid anything from him, good or bad. And he never hid anything from us either. So, he supported us unconditionally until the day he died.
Yeah. So, something that I want to kind of like talk about here at the end as we're reflecting on like my grandpa is, the things that we're talking about today about this incredible man and all of the things all the lives he changed and like this just dynamic human being that he was, is we have so much information and his stories recorded and his pictures and his stories that have been passed down for years and years, because you about 20 years ago were really intentional about being like, our family story needs to be told. And I I remember first we did it in slideshows. So we'd go through Grandma and Papa's pictures and we'd put together this slideshow about our family story. And it was like Grandma and Papa, how they met, where everybody was born, all of his business ventures. And we would sit as a family at least once a year and we would watch this presentation about like our family legacy. And looking back on that, I think that's such a cool thing that we did that. And it's a very rare thing, I feel like, to do, because so many families, they think that just living alongside someone that everybody just remembers, and there needs to be some more intentionality, I think, to sharing your legacy, which is what we did with our video project with PaPa. And if you guys watch the YouTube video of the podcast, like, we're going to have a lot of like these extra clips to show examples of what we did. But we did this video because, I mean, we knew Grandma and Papa were dynamic, but we also knew, like, the reality is my kids won't really remember them or know them as well. And so we wanted to capture them telling their own stories, answering questions on video, like, in their element. So we did this family legacy project where each family submitted about 10 questions. They could be questions like, what makes you smile, like we talked about a while ago, or how did you and Grandma meet, or what's the best advice you have for the next generation, or what was your biggest business failure, and like, how did you come back from it? All these questions. And not only have we captured their spirit as they answer these questions, and we have these videos for years to come to show like generations and generations, but like it also it shows your family members too that you really care about all the things they went through, and that you care about your family and like your family story. And I think that it's an important thing to talk about on the podcast, because I think as people kind of grow further and further away from their families and their family stories, it's like, I just want to encourage you. Everybody's got an iPhone now in their back pocket. Like, when you're home for Christmas, or like if you're around a great aunt that you love or a grandparent, ask them 5 questions and say, hey, I'm going to record you answering these questions just so like I have them. I mean, we talk a little bit about that, because we were talking about, because
that's one of our probably biggest treasures. And it was 20 years ago, almost 15 years ago, that we did this. And and like you said, it doesn't have to be much. And kind of what started it was, a coworker of mine. We were talking about, we were going to try to do it. Mal was going to ask the questions. We were going to video it, and we had a decent videographer, but I was griping about the cost of doing this, and she told me their mom passed away when she was a young girl, and she said, I would pay that much money to hear an audio recording of my mom saying my name. And, and to look forward at that, what our grandkids are going to see is our parents telling their stories, and seeing them laugh, and seeing them, how they met each other, and hear my mom talk about his girlfriend, him calling his girlfriend when she was a switchboard operator. Those are stories that we had heard verbally, and it was our job to kind of repeat them and maybe get them right. But that video project 15, 20 years ago is going to be there for our great-grandkids that aren't even born yet to see and know who their great-granddad was. So and like you said, it doesn't have to be an elaborate production. iPhones are probably as good a quality as what that camera was 15 years ago, and just capture it and save it somewhere, because it's going to be a treasure 15 years from now.
Yeah, it's going to be the ultimate treasure. I talked about this, and just to kind of wrap it up, I could go on and on about just the way that he was and all of his amazing stories, and we'll put some of that in that bonus video. But if I had to pick like the 3 things like that I learned from him that I bring into my own life that I thought were just so dynamic. We've already talked about them, but I just want to reiterate them. Then I want to know what yours are. One was just how he made it through adversity and was so joy-filled on the other side. That specific second part too is so amazing to me. So I think that is a big one for me. And then I already talked about it earlier, but just how special he made people feel. He always noticed people. He looked them in the eye when he talked to them. He remembered their names. He asked about their families. He asked what he could do for them. he was just the ultimate like server of other people, and like he made people feel so special, and he called out the things that you were good at, and he made you feel good about them, and he did it with all of us, with the grandkids. I mean, it's one of the reasons that I leaned into singing so much. Was he was just he was there to encourage it every step of the way, taking me to voice lessons every week, but then also going with me to Houston, making the CD, then let me sell them at Bud's Country Corner to the coal miners and the farmers. Those things were just two of my favorite things about him, and like the things that I admired the most. What would you say, like, were some of the things that you admired the most in him that you carry into your life?
You know, and I guess probably one of the things is I don't think he ever judged anybody by the amount of money they had, by what kind of car they drove. Like I said, he grew up broke, and maybe his risk-taking behavior was he wasn't afraid to be broke again. So that's part of it. He instilled in all of us to work hard, be good human beings. He would have been proud of us no matter probably what we did. Unlike he probably laughed at some of our failures more than our mom did, but he didn't discourage us when we did make mistakes. So not judging people was one of them, and then just the unconditional love that he gave just to everybody, strangers, friends. He would everybody that walked in. We have this big wrestling camp every year, and the Nashville coaches come in, and a lot of them during the camp will hang out over with Dad. And one of them told my brother Robert, he said, "That's the coolest old man that I've ever met." So he had a draw to him where people wanted to be around him and wanted to hear what he had to say. So most of the times it wasn't very important. Most of the times it was probably funny, but he always had something clever to say. So those are two things: his sense of humor, his caring for other people, and his non-judgmental attitude, I guess, would be the three things I would throw out.
Yeah, that's all three very true. Moving forward, like I'm still a little bit, I'm nervous about going home the next time, because since his funeral, like it's gonna be the first time like going home, and it's just like, I try not to focus on like this, what's missing, and like this whole kind of in our family, but more so just like what he was to our family. Like it's what a great thing to miss someone and to love someone so much that you just wanted them to live forever. Mm-hmm. I mean, even the day he died, he just had throngs of people just in and out the door just wanting to see him. Then he had 400 people standing out in a field because he didn't want a real funeral. So he wanted to have it out in our field in the freezing cold weather. And you just had people from far and wide, old and young and rich and not wealthy, like standing there in that field, like celebrating the life of this incredible person that we just were so lucky to have, But is there anything else like that you want to say about him, or reflection?
No, there's just tons that we got to say. I hope we told enough about it. Like I said, your talk was very focused, but there's so much probably that there's probably more that we haven't said than what we have.
Yeah.
In talking about missing him, it's every day. The time when I check in was either in my car driving home, usually like, and there were times that I knew that he'd be around the house, because during the day he was gone. He was fishing, or he was making whiskey, or he's gardening. He even retired. He was gone from daylight till dark. And then I knew he was always around in the evening. So on my ride home to the house, I'd call and I'd check in. What are you up to? What did you do today? And I miss that. I miss, and like you said, I saw the gravesite since the funeral the first time last week. The first time I drove up there and looked at it. So it's a hole that will be filled in as long as we keep remembering the positive parts and what he taught us, and knowing that he survived and was able to be joyful even after bad things happen. And even after we lose him, we've got to search every day for that joy, and we got to learn how to laugh like he did. What makes us smile? We got to remember that. So that's kind of where I leave it, and that's how I deal with missing him. It may get easier, but I still, now I call Grandma. I say, "What are you doing?" And she usually was the one to answer the phone when she could find it, but I would check in with her. So that's kind of replaced in the hole that where I miss him. I still have her there at the house.
Yeah, and she's doing great. I feel like Grandma's just, to be married to someone for how long were they married?
I'm 67 years.
67 years, to be married to someone for 67 years and to lose them, like what a shift in the ultimate shift in your life. And I'm proud of her because she is still joy filled and carrying his legacy on.
23 grandkids. He's got a lot to celebrate.
And 23 great grandkids. Yep. And many more to come, I'm sure. But like we said in the beginning of the podcast, my grandpa was the oldest. My dad is the oldest. I'm the oldest. I was like, let's just do a podcast where we talk about him, just so that we can share his legacy with other people. Because if you can change one thing in your life from something that you heard about his story, that's just another person that he touched that he didn't even meet. So thanks for doing this with me, because I know it's not easy to talk about. This was the least that I've cried talking about it.
I got through it pretty good.
Yeah, we did good. Thank you.
Yeah,
for coming on.
I hope we stood up to what the last one that you did. I said I was in just got internet access, and I was in the middle of a Delta Crown room, and I started crying like a baby in there. And they said, "Has he had too much to drink or something?"
Oh, that's sweet.
But I hope we tell the story and do him justice.
Yeah, that keynote was a surprise to me too, because we changed the direction of that the week of the keynote, and I was like, I want to talk about my grandpa, and everybody was like, even Madison that was helping me with everything that's on my team that knows me very well was like, "Are you sure you're ready for this?" And I was like, yeah, because every time I would be talking about what I want to talk about to them, I was bawling, crying the whole time. And they're looking at me like, "Are you sure you want to do this for 260,000 people?" But you get strength in the moment. I'm just glad any opportunity to share his legacy and to help bring some of his life and his spirit into other people's lives. I'm going to take it, even if I bumble through it a little bit. So thank you guys for listening to this podcast and for letting my dad and I reflect on the greatest man on earth, my grandpa, PaPa Bud. If you watch the YouTube video, you'll see that extra content that we were talking about. And I just want to encourage you one more time, if you have a grandparent or a parent or someone that's important to you that's still living, to make it a point to write some questions down. Get your iPhone out and record them telling your family's story. Ask them those questions, and that piece of content, that little tiny video that you film, is going to be something that you treasure and cherish for years and years to come. So I want to encourage you to do that. And even though it may feel a little awkward and a little hard, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, my grandpa is not going to want to do that at Christmas," I assure you that they will want to do that, and they love sharing their story. And it's something that we'll treasure forever, and it's worth its weight in gold and more. So thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Living Fully podcast. If you like this episode, share on social media the piece that you liked and that resonated with you, and leave us a review. We always appreciate that over here on the podcast, and it helps other people to find our show. Thank you so much for tuning in, and tune in next week for another episode.